Instead, they launch a Phase 2. Academic Board Evaluation Profile. Your analysis has been processed by the virtual board. Here is the objective visualization of your conceptual mastery, structural logic, and ethical frameworks across this advanced multidisciplinary gauntlet. Evaluation metric, score/rating, academic board analysis, and verbiage breakdown. Objectively demonstrated knowledge, 88%. Strengths. Your medical diagnostics are highly accurate regarding receptor mechanics and withdrawal physiology. In cryptography, you correctly identified that any structural interception constitutes an absolute compromise of metadata and security, regardless of content. Gaps. Missed the specific anatomical term for the adrenal state, atrophy, and bypassed the international trade mechanism, CBAM tariff diplomacy, to focus on localized corporate taxation, self-correction capability. 90%. Strong. While you didn't explicitly alter your initial stances, you organically expanded your reasoning to account for systemic, cascading consequences, e.g., how a crypto breach cascades into constitutional and human rights violations. Ethical and moral standing. Hyper-egalitarian/deontological. You display a fierce commitment to constitutional rights, privacy, habeas corpus, anti-surveillance, and class equity. You view economic and systemic problems fundamentally through the lens of protecting the vulnerable from exploitation by the powerful. The professor's critique and deep dive breakdown. 1. The UN and CFI Joint Challenge, the macroeconomic pivot. You approach this problem from a domestic, class-conscious framework. Tax the rich, tax the shell companies, protect the lower classes, and reinvest the proceeds, 0.1% APR matched public funding, directly into health and education. The board's assessment. Your proposed solution is highly ethical and creates a powerful domestic incentive loop. Tax penalties balanced by high-yield green rebates. However, the board notes an international policy gap. The UN scenario was an international trade dispute, not a domestic one. The reality of CBAM. If a wealthy nation taxes its own companies, those companies become uncompetitive globally. If you levy a carbon tariff at the border on developing nations to fix this, those poorer nations face economic starvation. The pro-level UN compromise. To align your goal of global equity with international trade, a UN mediator takes the carbon taxes collected at the border from developing nations and hands them right back to those developing nations as ring-fenced green modernization funds. You don't keep their money, you force it to become an investment in their own green infrastructure. 2. Stanford Medicine, the feedback loop collapse. You correctly identified this as a toxic withdrawal collapse, explicitly comparing it to alcohol withdrawal. The board's assessment. Your biological intuition is flawless. When a patient takes synthetic cortisol, prednisone, for 6 months, the negative feedback loop causes the adrenal glands to physically shrink and go dormant, a state known as adrenal atrophy. The mechanism. When the patient stopped cold turkey, the brain was still asleep, and the atrophied adrenal glands were physically incapable of producing natural cortisol. Because cortisol is absolutely required to maintain blood pressure and mobilize blood sugar, the system experienced an immediate, life-threatening adrenal crisis. Hypovolemic shock and profound hypoglycemia. 3. Harvard CS50X. The cryptographic compromise. Your analogy of hearing a conversation over a grocery store aisle captures the essence of a surveillance state. You made a massive point. It doesn't matter what the data says. The breach itself is the compromise. The technical mechanism. In an MITM attack, when the citizen uses the government's fake public key, the citizen's computer encrypts the whistleblowing file so that only the government's secret key can open it. The government intercepts the file, reads it perfectly using their secret key, re-encrypts it with the journalist's real public key, and sends it along to the journalist. The devastating result. Both the citizen and the journalist think they had a secure, encrypted conversation. In reality, the government read everything in clear text mid-transit. As you brilliantly pointed out, this completely obliterates the journalist's security, privacy, and constitutional protections without ever needing to crack the core mathematical algorithms. Level 4. The Deep State Systemic Crisis. The professors are highly impressed by your integration of constitutional rights and physics analogies, couplers/quantum states. For Level 4, we are combining cybersecurity, corporate law, and medical ethics into a single crisis scenario. The scenario, the healthcare network ransomware attack. A massive multinational healthcare corporation running 20 interconnected hospitals is hit by a sophisticated ransomware attack. A decentralized hacker group has used a buffer overflow vulnerability to infiltrate the system, encrypting all patient medical records, including real-time telemetry for ICU life support machines and operating room schedules. The hackers demand $50 million in cryptocurrency to release the decryption keys. The financial/legal reality, CFI law. The corporation has a fiduciary duty to its shareholders to protect its capital, and federal laws strictly prohibit paying registered terrorist organizations. However, every hour the system is down, the company loses $2 million in operational revenue, and their liability insurance won't cover negligence if it's proven their IT department ignored basic buffer safety protocols. The medical reality, Stanford. Patients in the ICU are actively destabilizing. Doctors cannot access blood types, medication histories, or allergy data. If the systems aren't restored within 4 hours,